Hello and welcome to Face Off. Pressure from Germany is affecting the new French president's flexibility on public finances. But on the domestic economy, he doesn't seem to have much wriggle room either. The National Institute for Economic and Statistical Studies published a sobering forecast on Tuesday evening. French GDP is set to grow just 0.4% this year. That's less than what Mr. Hollande banked on for his budget. And consumer spending could sink to 1986 levels. So what can President François Hollande deliver? To debate that, I'm joined by our regular duo, Jean-Marc Gonin from Le Figaro magazine. Hello.
Hello, Armin.
Joining me also, Philip Turle from our sister station, RFI. Hello, Philip.
Armin.
This economic forecast obviously is a very bad start for the new government, isn't it, Jean-Marc?
Yes, the figures look pretty ugly. It's a very difficult situation that the socialists have inherited, probably also because Sarkozy swept a bit of the dust under the carpet, and it's coming out right now. So it's the situation is increasingly difficult, and Hollande is lucky in a way because his left wing and the communists and everything that is left from the Socialist Party has come out pretty weakened of the elections, both elections, presidential and parliamentary. So he will have people on the streets. He can't deliver the few promises he's made will be very tough to deliver. Many will be postponed. And we haven't seen yet the tax increases and what will be cut also from the expenses, government expenses. And that will bring some wrath around. And people will get to the streets probably in the next fall. So Hollande will very quickly face a difficult situation and what we call the l'état de grâce, the state of immunity of race.
A honeymoon period.
Honeymoon with the
you predict protests then against what? Tax?
Tax and this week he has delivered very few on the basic wage, on the basic wage we have in France. They have given only 2%, which makes in the people's wallet 22 euros a month increase, and that's peanuts. And people are pretty angry, and precisely left wing and trade unions have been protesting that already.
It's only a tiny bit ahead of inflation, 0.something%
exactly.
ahead. Philip, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the figures make incredibly depressing reading for a new government. Unemployment is up, the growth forecast is down. I don't think you can aspire to even worse predictions than that when you're about to take office, because it basically means that you're going to have your hands tied behind your back. The paradox is that ahead of his election, François Hollande has had to come up with some goods. He's had to come up with a tantalising deal to seduce the voters to vote for him. So he was saying, right, I'm going to reduce the retirement age for certain categories of people to 60, which everyone else is saying was ridiculous because we have to increase the retirement age because everyone is living longer. I'm also going to employ 60,000 civil servants. Well, you can't do that because we haven't got the money to pay for them. Well, I'm going to do it anyway, he was saying. And on top of that, I'm going to predict that this year we'll have at least 1% growth. Growth isn't there. So there are all these extra measures that he was promising before the election, so people voted for him. They said, fine, we'll vote for you. If you're going to give us that, that's what we want. And in any case, we want to get rid of Nicolas Sarkozy. So Nicolas Sarkozy is gone. Hollande is now president. Believe it or not, he has the most power of any president of the Fifth Republic in France since 1958, even General de Gaulle, because he has absolute majority in the National Assembly, in the Senate, he controls the regions except for one, and so all over France the socialists are running the country. But he has really such a very, very limited amount of power to be able to introduce his policies, as Jean-Marc was saying. The problem now is, OK, I was a candidate, I got elected, I'm president of France, I was predicting these things. Now I'm going to have a real problem trying to predict them. And my prediction is that if he can't come up with the goods, which he can't really at the moment, then there are going to be problems he's going to have to face in the autumn. Just to give you one little example of that is when François Mitterrand came to office in 1981, he introduced immediately a policy of handing over presents to everybody. And just one thing he did was to raise the minimum wage by 20%. This time round, we've got a 2% raise, which means that, in basic terms, everybody who's on the minimum wage who gets a 2% raise will be able to buy one baguette of bread extra every day.
The
for a
FT
month.
today is reporting that this is actually 0.6 percentage
That's
points
because it doesn't
above
take into account the
inflation.
inflation aspect.
Yeah.
So in fact, you only get 0.6% extra, which is like one baguette of French long bread per day.
There's a clear sign that the socialists are not going to deliver much on the economic and social field. When you look at the sign, when you look at the agenda that's expecting the parliament, you have so many sideshows being set up, like a new law on sexual harassment, gay marriage. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not important. I'm just saying that they will start with very liberal measures that have no cost, that are symbols, problems that are not exactly linked to public finances and economy, whereas these problems, I mean, economic problems, are in all opinion polls the most urgent ones seen in the eyes of the French people.
The only thing that François Hollande has, I think, in his favour is that most French people realise that there is an effort that needs to be made. Because on radio and television and in the press on a daily basis, there are always stories about the economic crisis, about Greece, about Italy, about Spain, about Cyprus, about all the problems facing Europe and the relationship between France and Germany over how to resolve the problem. So people do know that there is some large economic problem that has to be dealt with. What is slightly amusing is that I think up until fairly recently, most people in France thought they weren't affected by the global financial crunch. Like the Chernobyl atomic cloud had stopped at the frontiers of France, we were told in 1986, and that never actually come to France. It's a bit like that. And I think the wake-up call is going to be quite difficult because it's clear that France is in dire straits financially. It needs to find a way out. And with the policies that François Hollande has proposed in order to be elected, they're not going to help the country get back on its feet.
Which of the policies do you predict will be axed first, or perhaps the first couple? I mean, do you think the 60,000 teachers will survive? Do you think that the lowering the retirement age for certain categories will survive or not?
Well, I think the first measure, the teachers, will be very hard to implement. And on the other hand, the story with the 60-year retirement age is a very deceiving measure because it concerns so few people that they will even make it harder to get. That at the end of the day, I don't know how many thousands will be eligible, but very few, and it won't be a big weight on the public finances.
I think that I agree about the civil servant jobs. For example, there's a sort of devious way round it, especially as concerning the teachers are concerned, is they said, OK, we're going to bring in X number of new teachers. What they're in fact going to do is to prolong the contracts of those teachers already working. Yes. They're not actually going to bring in new teachers to supplement that number already existing. So we're not going to get extra numbers of teachers. We're just going to maintain the number by prolonging the contracts of those who are already working. So that's one way around the problem. As far as the bit being 60 is concerned, it applies to a very few number of people. I think there was a certain deception in the policies before the announcement during the election campaign that this was probably going to affect millions of people who wanted to retire. We could all retire at 60. In fact, that's not the case. It's just those who started work very early, and it's a very small number.
So ultimately, you think within maybe 6 months to a year, it's going to be a fairly austere party? It's not going to deviate that much from what President Sarkozy was doing before?
Don't have a choice.
It's not going to deviate so much. Well, remember how Hollande led his campaign. He said, we will have cuts will have to be made, but I want to be just. And obviously, last week they leaked some figures to the media about the so-called tax. How do you call it? The tax protection. Well, yes, no, the tax that was re-given to wealthy people.
Okay, the
tax shield, the fiscal shield. Yeah. The fiscal shield, they leaked the figures to tell the people, look how Sarkozy was unjust to the nation. Wealthy people got so much and you didn't get anything. So now they know that they will be judged also on terms of fairness.
Well, do you think the party will fall into line then? If you're saying he basically doesn't have, or hardly any room to manoeuvre, or are you going to have tax and spend left-wingers starting to jump on him?
It's going to be tax and spend. That's the way they're basing it at the moment. How long that will last remains to be seen. If you compare what happened in 1981 with the previous socialist government, lasted 2 years before there was a new prime minister coming along, because it won't happen, I don't think.
They won't have so long to wait.
They won't have that long. They've got to come up with the goods now. They don't have a choice, and they've also got to come up with a plan with Germany to save the rest of Europe. So that's another problem that France has got to sort out.
To speak like David Cameron, this time the cuts will harm the kind of entitlement culture that you have in France. People don't suspect this, but you will have in lower classes problems with the social spending, social benefits that will have to be cut, and we have not seen that yet, but it's coming.
Having said all that, Philip, you did touch on an important point about how much freedom, really, that Hollande has in the history of the Fifth Republic. What about the opposition? I mean, do you see them being very divided for some time now?
Well, not so much divided, but I think more obsessed with their own future and the infighting between two people who are trying to get the job of president. Because if they become president of the party, they are in a strong position to run for president of France in 2017. So in a way, the fact that the UMP, the opposition, the main opposition Conservative party in this country, didn't win the elections last month, puts them in a stronger position to try to win again in 5 years' time, because they know that François Hollande is going to be unpopular. So will it be, on the one side, the party leader, Jean-François Copé, who is outspoken, rather arrogant, a man who always has something to say about everything that's happening that the Socialist Party are doing? Or will it be the former Prime Minister, François Fillon, who for 5 years was Prime Minister under Nicolas Sarkozy, and who's seen as more of a man who will gather the forces together but is more discreet? That's the big ongoing fight between those two men over who's going to win, and that is why they're not really coming up with any alternative arguments to what the government is now trying to enforce.
Running out of time, Jean-Marc, perhaps just your final thoughts on, do you think the infighting is going to focus on the personal rivalries and power struggles rather than ideology, or should the UMP become more of a centre party? Of course, a lot of people there aren't very unhappy with the rightward turn of President Sarkozy in the closing stages of the campaign.
I think ideology will be at the forefront. They are having a hard time, not only because they are a defeated party, but they are having a hard time with the legacy of Sarkozy. And that's sheer ideology, because Sarkozy wanted to bring the party to the right. And now they are licking their wounds, thinking that was too much, and we shouldn't do this again.
Very quick final thought on that, Philip.
That is the number one question. Do we stay shifting towards the right to try to recuperate voters who voted for Marine Le Pen in the National Front, or do we move more to the centre to try to recuperate the centre, which could break away from the UMP if we move more to the far right? And that, so far, is the dividing point between the two parts of the party, and we don't know how they're going to turn. It depends on who gets the job in the elections for president in November. Then we'll know, and then we'll be able to make, I think we'll have a more clear vision about how the UMP is going to react after that election is over.
Okay, thank you very much. Philip Tell from RFI and Jean-Marc Gonin from Le Figaro magazine. That's all we have time for this face-off.